Why should we look into Biden's mental and physical decline? I break it all down in under 60 seconds.
Who specifically do you think gets a gold star for lying most profusely and just sort of continuing to cover this up over the years?
Sir, that would be like a photo finish. There'd be a lot that would probably right there at first place. They're all culpable. I mean, I read some of the headlines to the committee earlier. The Washington Post, CNN, NBC, where they, without evidence, to use their phrase, went after President Trump's physical and mental acuity, and yet failed to ask similar questions of the White House press office publicly. They failed to cover the stories. I don't think that there's a winner. I think they're all losers.
All right, guys, it is Wednesday. We've made it over the hump. I appreciate everyone who turned in yesterday. I love when Seth Keshel comes on to break down everything, because to me, we don't hear that kind of information in the mainstream media. And there's very few people who take the time that he does to give us the analytics, where things are headed. This doesn't mean that we're going to win everything, but it does mean that the trend is moving in our direction. You mentioned that 29 of the 30 states that we have data for that show registration are on our side. I put all the show notes in yesterday. I'll put a lot of it good. If you go to SeanSpicer.com, I try to always link to this stuff too. So it's an easy reference point. Frankly, that's how I keep track of stuff. I'm like, oh, if I put it in my newsletter, then I'll know where to go find it. So always feel like you can go there. A really cool show headed your way, if I don't say so myself. I want to give you a little bit of the background of what happened. I was reached out to by the Senate Judiciary Committee, and they were holding a hearing on Biden's mental and physical decline, and they wanted to know if I would testify. So I kind of was like, okay, explain why me and what you hope to get out of this. And what they said was, we're actually concerned about this potentially happening again, a cover-up of the leader of the free world. And you think back, remember like FDR, and they covered up the wheelchair. Like, we actually go back in history. There's some other examples where the staff and the media have been complicit in covering up. And that's kind of what happened. The staff and the media in the Biden administration knew that Joe Biden was declining. Anybody knew. We knew it. We were all watching it. They said nothing, though. So anyway, I talked to the folks in the Senate Judiciary Committee, and they said, well, you have a very unique position because of your experience as White House press secretary. You know what it should look like when you interact with the president on a daily basis. What did it look like under Trump versus what do we know about what happened under Biden? More importantly, what did the media do? And you remember, and I remember this specifically both during my tenure and after, these guys speculated over and over and over again about President Trump's fitness for office. They questioned his mental acuity. They questioned his physical fitness. And yet, when Biden came into office, those same people said nothing, despite actually having a tremendous amount of evidence that everyone saw with their own eyes. We saw it. We knew it. Yes, I get you can stumble here and there. That happens to all of us. But over and over again, the physical part is one thing. The mental thing we saw, and the examples were limitless. We heard him stumble, pause, call out for a dead congresswoman at an event, right? It wasn't until the debate that people started to go, okay, we need it, but we all knew it. So the Senate Judiciary Committee, in particular, Senators Cornyn of Texas and Senator Schmidt of Missouri said, hey, would you be willing to have this conversation with us about what it should be like? And I said, sure, I know what it's like with President Trump. He's up early. He goes to bed late. He's calling every 10 seconds in between. And all the senior staff is looped in onto his thinking. That's how it's supposed to go. The staff isn't supposed to be driving the agenda. The president is elected. He sets the agenda, and then you execute it. Of course, there's unelected staff. That's how it works. Everyone on the Dem side said, oh, all about Elon. He's unelected. Of course, none of these guys are elected. Cabinet secretaries aren't elected. Staffers like me weren't elected. But the president was, and we know from the first term and this term who's driving the train. President Trump is clearly in charge. Nobody, whether you're the biggest Trump hater in the world, you can agree that Donald Trump's in charge, right? In fact, they would argue that they'd probably think that the staff should be in charge on the left and in the media. But there's no question about that. The broader and bigger question is who was in charge during the Biden years? I wrote a book called Radical Nation where I made the case that this senior, longtime Biden staff, Bruce Reed, Steve Ricchetti, Anita Dunn, Ron Klain, they were leading this effort, covering it up and sort of, and there were instances where I said, think about this. And this was the tell for me. You remember when Biden started his administration and he wagged his finger at everyone and said, if you treat anybody without whatever kindness, I'll fire you myself day one. Well, TJ Ducklo was the deputy press secretary under Jen Psaki. Now, TJ Ducklo wasn't just some random deputy press secretary. He had been very close to the Bidens during the COVID years. And he was one of the very few people that got in to the House and was close to them, whatever. My point is that he was a very close advisor to the Biden family and to Joe Biden. And then he goes off on this riff on a political reporter and they fire him. And when Jen Psaki was asked about what the president thought of it and what the president's reaction was, she said Ron Klain informed him, the chief of staff. Now, I got to tell you this right now. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who was my deputy, if I had fired her without telling the president, informing him, I would have gotten fired. So here is this loyal family confidant, TJ Ducklo, who gets dismissed from his job and no one tells the president. The chief of staff says so after the fact, doesn't discuss it with him. It wasn't Jen Psaki, the press secretary. Why didn't she? I mean, to me, it just showed it was an early tell that something wasn't right there. And then, of course, you got Karine Jean-Pierre saying that the president runs circles around her. You got to be kidding me. I mean, President Trump does run circles around me. I'll admit that. That's why I try to get back in shape. But anyway, I think this hearing, and I know the House side, James Comer is going to have another where he calls Biden aides, is critical in understanding who's running the show, what guardrails we need to have on, what tells we should be looking for going forward, so this doesn't happen again. And it might seem silly, but this week alone, Eleanor Holmes Norton, the D.C. delegate, is 88 years old and is announcing that she's running for re-election again. And yet there's public statements out there from her colleagues saying that she's declining and missing a step, that her staff is largely in charge. I get these guys like being in power and getting driven around and all that kind of stuff. But at some point, they're not fit for office. And we do need to start to hold more people accountable for this stuff. So anyway, I thought it was a pretty cool opportunity for me to publicly testify in the Senate at the Judiciary Committee about my view on what the media and the Biden staff did to cover this up and juxtapose that with what it's like to work for President Trump. So today I want to share with you what I shared with the United States Senate and some of the back and forth that we had. So I hope you guys enjoy this as well. To me, this is a great opportunity to bring insight into a subject that's not getting a ton of attention, especially this week. By the way, tomorrow, an amazing panel we've got coming your way. We'll break it all down. We'll talk about the latest going on in Iran, plus all the other foreign policy issues. Jessica Anderson, Sentinel Action Fund, is going to be here. Rob Bluey from the Heritage Foundation is going to be here. So we've got some great guests coming your way. And then on Friday, Trump's former national security advisor, Robert O'Brien, is going to be here as well. He'll break it down with us. And then we've got a guy named David Zweig. He's got a brand new book on COVID coming up soon. Plus James O'Keefe, he's a former Project Veritas leader. He's got some updates on what's going on with that group, to put it mildly. I'll give you the insight from him as well. So before I bring you what I said to the Senate and some of that interaction, I want to just give you a heads up that, as you guys know, this is the beginning of our 250th anniversary. The Army celebrated it last week. And Tax Network this month proudly is celebrating our nation's birthday, honoring freedom, resilience, fiscal independence. And to mark this occasion, they're giving 10% off all of their services. Now, I've told you this before if you watch the show. If you have unfiled taxes, back taxes, whatever, do not think that you can handle the IRS, or for that matter, any government agency, on your own. These guys have the full backing of all of these investigators and that kind of stuff. The IRS can do tax liens. 5,000 is what they average a day. Wage garnishments, property seizures, you name it. That's the power that they have. So if you miss the April 15th deadline, you owe taxes, you got back taxes. I'm just going to tell you this right now. Waiting any longer will make the problem worse. It's just a fact. The beautiful thing about this is you can call my friends at Tax Network USA and get ahead of the problem. It is 100% free to have a consultation with them. And when I tell you they're the best in the business, I cannot overstate that. They know who to talk to at the IRS, who not to talk to. They've got a preferred direct line. So if it's you that has unfiled taxes or back taxes, give them a call today. If it's not you, but you know somebody who is, do me a favor, give them a call. Like I said, it's absolutely free. You can get ahead of the problem, probably stop the calls and the letters. Take the first step, though, by calling the 1-800-958-1000. Better yet, go online, go to tnusa.com/Sean Spicer. One word, no spaces, no nothing. tnusa.com/Sean Spicer. And you will get 10% all of their services as part of the celebration of our nation's birthday. Regain control of your finances, get the expert help you need. Go to the folks at Tax Network USA, tnusa.com/Sean Spicer. All right, guys, you guys have, if you're a watcher of the show, you know about, I've been really into the wellness Mahab movement ideas. I'm getting better. I'm not 100% there, but at the core of everything, if you're trying to go down a wellness journey, is sleep. That is it. If you can't get good sleep, the eating and the working out and the red dye, getting rid of the red dyes will not matter. That's why I'm so excited to share something that's made a real difference in my life. And if you know what I'm talking about, you know every single night I cannot go to sleep without taking Beam Stream powder. This is one of the bags I crush. This is the cinnamon cocoa one. I am a few scoops away. I thought I was one, but it's a little bit more in the bag of the brownie one. They are all amazingly delicious. I literally will get out of bed, run downstairs, put a scoop in a little water, put it in the microwave for 30 to 40 seconds and take it down. I've missed it before and I thought, oh, it's late, I'm in bed. I'm telling you, I feel the difference. If I don't take it, I wake up, I'm groggy, I toss, I turn. When you take Beam Stream powder, it has all that natural stuff that you've heard about before: melatonin, magnesium, L-theanine, apigenin, reishi, all of it in one amazing, really good drink. I love this stuff so much. But it will make such a difference. I sleep through the night. I wake up feeling rip-roaring, ready to go. They've helped like 17.5 million nights sleep already. Athletes, professionals, regular people. It's completely science-backed. This is literally will be a game changer in your life. And I'm not the only one that's done this. As I said, athletes, professionals. Here's the deal. Beam is giving all of the listeners the ultimate Patriot discount of 40% off. Go to shopbeam.com/Spicer. Use code Spicer for 40% off any of the flavors. I'm not going to judge you. I don't care whether you like the peppermint, the cocoa, the brownie. They're all amazing. I literally cannot get over how great these things taste and how effective it is. So support a great American company on your journey to wellness by getting a better night's sleep. Go to shopbeam.com/Spicer and use code word Spicer for 40% off. All right, without further ado, I want to share with you what I shared with the Senate today.
The U.S. Constitution provides, as we all know, for 3 co-equal branches. Today, we're concerned about the chief executive, the President of the United States. As we know, the chief executive, the head of the executive branch, enforces the laws, appoints high-ranking officials, serves as commander-in-chief of our armed forces, can issue pardons, and can veto and advocate for legislation. But what are we to do when the president is incapable of performing these duties? Last June, the American public saw with their own eyes what many knew to be true, but would not dare to admit publicly. Our sitting commander-in-chief was suffering from severe cognitive decline, as evident by this video, which I will now show.
For what I've been able to do with the with the COVID, with dealing with everything we have to do with. Look, if we finally beat Medicare, wants to get rid of the ability of Medicare for us to be able to negotiate.
As we now know, there was a conspiracy to hide the president's true condition by his family, by his staff, by the media, and many elected officials. Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson, who co-authored a book entitled Original Sin. That book amounted to a mea culpa by the mainstream media but they summed up the problem when they wrote this. Quote, "What the world saw at Joe Biden's one and only 2024 debate was not an anomaly. It was not a cold. It was not someone who was under or over prepared. It was not someone who was just a little tired. It was the natural result of an 81-year-old man whose capabilities had been diminishing for years. Biden, his family, and his team let their self-interest and their fear of another Trump term justify an attempt to put an at times addled old man in the Oval Office for 4 more years." So make no mistake about it, this was a constitutional crisis, bigger than President Biden, bigger than any single election, and one that cannot be absolved by the collective apology of the press and an election where the president's party lost. Current events, such as we are experiencing today in the Middle East, are a prime example of why we need a president with his full cognitive abilities, making important decisions involving war and peace. We should know, but we don't yet know, precisely what should happen when a president is unable to perform his or her constitutional duties. And that's the purpose of today's hearing. There are many unanswered questions from this scandal, questions that the authors of Original Sin failed to address in their book, questions that are foundational to the proper functioning of our government. We will address those here and shine a light on exactly what went on in the White House during the Biden presidency. We simply cannot ignore what transpired because President Biden is no longer in office. With a compromised president, our government's very legitimacy and capacity to function was undermined. The American people paid a price, from President Biden's handling of the border crisis to the disastrous events we saw unfold in Afghanistan. It's absolutely imperative that Congress grapple with these difficult questions, no matter how much our Democratic colleagues would like to simply sweep it under the rug. We need to know who was in charge during the last months of the Biden administration. Was it his wife, his chief of staff, nameless others? None of these people were elected by the American people, nor were they authorized by the Constitution and laws of the United States to carry out the duties of the President of the United States. The 25th Amendment provides a roadmap for succession in instances of presidential incapacity. Section 4 gives the Vice President and a majority of the President's cabinet the authority to challenge the President's ability to carry out the functions of his office subject to a vote in Congress. But in this instance, the Vice President and the cabinet, the very ones authorized by the 25th Amendment to question the President's capacity, they did nothing. Are there penalties when the when the cabinet and the Vice President refuse to carry out their duties under Section 4 of the 25th Amendment? Should there be more accountability? The framers of this amendment acknowledged that the execution of that amendment would depend on the good faith of the cabinet and the Vice President. But Biden's cabinet and the Vice President did not act in good faith. They acted in their political and personal self-interest. This is the great paradox of self-government. Many of the rules, traditions, and institutions that sustain our republic are self-enforcing. The health and legitimacy of our democratic republic rests on the character of the men and women who serve in government. As a government, it is imperative that we have clear contingency plans when emergency strikes. And yes, it is an emergency when we have a sitting president who's unable to discharge the duties of that office. The concerns raised by this incident stretch far beyond the bounds of partisan politics. I will note that few of my Democratic colleagues are here today. Thank you to Senator Welch from Vermont for being here, leaving us with no other option than to take the boycotting of this hearing as an admission of guilt for their role in this crisis. We must not turn away from the search for answers, and it is not an overstatement to say that the future of our country could one day hinge on how we choose to act or not act on this very issue. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses this morning as we examine the difficult but necessary questions that must be answered from this monumental scandal.
The title of the hearing, Unfit to Serve, captures a sobering and undeniable truth. President Biden was mentally unfit to carry out the responsibilities of the most powerful office in the world. Given his mental incapacity, the American people deserve to know who was running the country the last 4 years. Today, as we seek to answer this question, it is deeply disappointing but not surprising that most Democrats on this committee have chosen to all but boycott the hearing and have failed to call a single witness. They have chosen to ignore this issue like they ignored President Biden's decline. Their absence speaks volumes, an implicit admission that the truth is too inconvenient to face. By refusing to engage in this critical examination, they abdicate their responsibility to the American people. This de facto boycott is not just a refusal to participate, it's a refusal to serve the American people who deserve answers about who is truly leading their government. President Biden's decline did not suddenly begin in June of 2024. It was a persistent and obvious truth that was evident for years to anyone who was willing to see it. This reality did not require special insider knowledge or investigative reporting to uncover. We didn't need Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson to tell us what millions of Americans could freely observe with their own eyes. The truth was glaringly obvious. Anyone who was paying attention could tell that the emperor had no clothes. On border policy, our nation's borders were handed over to the radical left-wing element of the administration, throwing open our borders to 15 million illegal aliens, an unprecedented immigration crisis that pulled our nation into chaos. On foreign policy, haphazard and reckless decisions placed our warfighters in jeopardy, escalated conflicts around the globe, and led to a catastrophic humiliation on the world stage that claimed the lives of 13 American soldiers, including one Missourian, during the disastrous withdrawal from Kabul. On the economy, rampant inflation drove up the cost of life's essentials, making them unaffordable to countless hardworking families. In the realm of culture, the regime censored free speech, closed down churches, targeted traditional Catholics and parents at school board meetings, and let an unelected class of left-wing radicals degrade, attack, and lie about our history and our heritage. A poisonous anti-Western, anti-American ideology that had once been confined to elite university classrooms suddenly became the official White House policy. All of this was done not in isolation. It was sustained, defended, and covered for by an alliance of elite institutions, from the media to the so-called expert class to big tech to the federal bureaucracy itself. When we speak of collusion among elites, or the so-called deep state, we're accused of being conspiracy theorists. But this was no theory. It was plain and overt, out in the open for everyone to see. For 4 years, we had a president who could barely string together coherent sentences after 6 p.m. Yet, this glaring fact went unreported, undiscussed, and unaddressed. Why? Because the Democrat Party, corporate media, federal bureaucracy, and big tech companies collaborated to conceal the truth from the American people, not out of ignorance, but because it advanced their own interests. In the absence of a functioning president, chaos took hold. An empty vessel occupying the Oval Office becomes a puppet for those surrounding him. Sean Spicer. Mr. Spicer served as the 30th White House press secretary, is the author of 4 best-selling books, and the host of the Sean Spicer Show. Mr. Spicer previously served as Communications Director and Chief Strategist of the Republican National Committee and worked for several members of Congress. He currently serves on the Board of Visitors of the U.S. Naval Academy, holds master's degrees from the U.S. Navy War College, and is in his 26th year of service in the U.S. Navy. Mr. Spicer is a native of Rhode Island and resides in Virginia. It is the tradition of this committee that all witnesses will be sworn in. If you'd please rise, I'll swear you in now. Raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Chairman Schmidt and Cornyn, members of the committee, thank you for having me. I was asked to share my experience as a senior White House staffer with respect to the interactions that I and other senior staff had with President Trump during his first term. During my tenure as press secretary, I interacted with the president multiple times every day. Most days I would talk to him by phone or in person early in the morning and then multiple times throughout the day, including weekends. For the most senior positions in the White House, those designated by the rank of assistant to the president, which includes the White House Chief of Staff, the White House Counsel, and the press secretary, it is critical to have regular interaction with the president. The position of press secretary especially demands this type of consistent and intentional communication. I or any other press secretary, regardless of administration, could not do the job effectively without regular communication with the president. It was my responsibility to have the most up-to-date understanding of President Trump's position on policy, personnel, and everything in between. Admittedly, I made a couple of rather high-profile mistakes during my tenure. You may have read some of them. But in all cases, those mistakes occurred when I wasn't connected with the president's thinking or position on a particular issue or policy. Coordinating and collaborating among even the most senior staff cannot replace direct communication with the president himself. In my position, I was very well acquainted with the president's work, his day-to-day responsibilities, and his fitness for office. I watched him serve with the strength and endurance of a man half his age. As you can see on almost a daily basis through events, statements, and social media posts, he's up early and ends his days very late. Yet in several instances during his first term, the media questioned his fitness for office. Guests and so-called experts like Sanjay Gupta at CNN were called upon to speculate on the result of Trump's physical and mental well-being. The Washington Post ran hit pieces with headlines like, "The White House struggles to silence talk of Trump's mental fitness." Vox wrote, "Is Trump mentally unfit to be president?" NBC ran a story by the Associated Press that raised mental health concerns regarding the president. CNN's Brian Stelter questioned if members of the news media were, quote, tiptoeing around obvious questions about President Trump's instability. These headlines were not isolated instances. Most major news outlets ran with these ridiculous type of propaganda pieces. To use one of the media's favorite terms, these inquiries were without evidence. That brings us to the juxtaposition of how the very same media covered the Biden administration. To be blunt, the legacy media failed the American people. They failed to do their job. Many, rightly so, believe the media in this country is culpable in covering up the obvious decline of the 46th president of the United States. The scrutiny that was baselessly directed at President Trump during his first term was wholly absent from the media coverage of the Biden White House. The media lacked any sense of curiosity that would naturally stem from what the public could see with their own eyes. Even in the face of deeply concerning and public signs of President Biden's mental and physical decline, legacy media outlets were silent. Biden and his senior aides flatly dismissed the need for a cognitive test during his tenure, as had been requested of President Trump. Yet no protest was heard from the voices that were so critical of Trump. With the exception of a couple White House reporters like Fox News Channel's Peter Doocy, reporters generally refused to breach the subject at White House briefings. News outlets weren't the only ones complicit in covering up Biden's decline. Presidential staff would have or should have been interacting with Biden on a daily basis. At best, his administration was grossly negligent. At worst, Biden's staff actively concealed his fitness for office. When White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said President Biden could run circles on her, there were only two possible conclusions: that she herself was in poor health and in need of medical assistance, or that she was lying. There is no question that a vast difference between how President Trump interacted with his staff and how President Biden did. Whether one supports President Trump or not, he is clearly the most accessible and transparent president in modern history. And there is no question who is running this country. The same cannot be said of President Biden. It is the president who is elected by the American people. The role of staff is to execute his agenda and policies. I thank the committee for holding this hearing so that going forward, the American people can have the confidence in who is running the country and making critical decisions. The American people deserve no less.
Of some previous statements from Biden administration officials and Democratic Party officials telling us not to believe our lying eyes. We can play the video.
Does the president have the stamina, physically and mentally, do you think, to continue on even after 2024?
Don, you're asking me this question. Oh my gosh, he's the president of the United States. You know, I can't even keep up with him.
The most difficult part about a meeting with President Biden is preparing for it, because he is sharp, intensely probing, and detail-oriented and focused.
I can testify because I've been working very closely with this president for the past 2 years. I've been knowing him for 30 years. And I'm telling you, this guy's tough. He's smart. He's on his game.
Joe Biden has vision. He has knowledge. He has a strategic thinker.
The president is focused. He's detail-oriented. He's always thinking about the big picture.
He is engaging. He is capable. He has an incredible record as president.
And I'm often with him on foreign trips. He's at the top of his game.
So he has a vision, he has knowledge, he has judgment, he has a strategic thinking.
I met with the president, 5 or 6 weeks ago, and he seemed fine to me.
I have complete confidence in the president. I have watched him expertly guide meetings of staff and cabinet members. I could not have more confidence in the president.
I would just tell you that I meet frequently with the president, and every single time I meet with him, he is just fine.
But he is, again, knowledgeable, wise.
Incredibly sharp, incredibly probing, incredible command of the details.
He is sharp. He is on top of things.
There is nothing to these challenges, these suggestions that somehow he's not sharp and he's not capable.
We see Joe Biden up close. We know how attuned he is to the issue.
And you're going to see how smart he is and the experience he has.
I say his age is an asset.
Aha! He's wise.
Yes, he's wise. He has wisdom. He has experience.
And his experience, because of his age and his wisdom, has been invaluable to this country.
A lot of countries, people who've been in office a longer period of time are praised for their wisdom.
I have seen a lot of 72-year-olds not as capable as this 80-year-old.
It is hard for us to keep up with this president.
His mental acuity is great. It's fine. It's as good as it's been over the years. He's fine. All this right-wing propaganda that his mental acuity has declined is wrong.
And this kind of sense that he's not ready for this job is just a bucket of BS that's so deep, your boots will get stuck in.
Mr. Spicer, I wanted to ask you, you alluded to this, but the media so desperate to make sure President Trump never got back into office. Of course, you saw the lawfare that took place, but then, of course, this narrative that Joe Biden was fine, don't believe your lying eyes, until that they couldn't deny it anymore based on the debate. Could you just kind of compare that to your experience when you were, press secretary for President Trump, to sort of the inquiries that were made daily about his mental acuity versus the inability to do that during the 4 years under Joe Biden?
Senator, in many cases, there was no inquiry. They would just run with a story, having guests on that would question his physical or mental acuity, speculate on it, bring guests on that would speculate it. We would often then push back on those kind of stories. That's in vast contrast to the lack of any kind of curiosity that existed throughout the 4 years of President Biden. And I think the difference was they would seize on the simplest thing with President Trump, whereas in President Biden's case, there was multiple issues of physical, mental confusion, him going in the wrong direction, him falling down, him misunderstanding an event or not being able to finish the sentence. That was never the case with President Trump. They were almost manufacturing instances in his case without actually trying to get to the bottom of a story or inquire within the press office to get our response. They would go with the story, then we'd push back. With Biden, my understanding from the conversations that I would have with the media is they would never ask. They just literally were basically afraid to go there.
My last question will be for Mr. Spicer, Legacy Media. How in the world do we hold them accountable? If all of us on the outside can see it and we are saying, get to the bottom of this, but yet they refuse, what mechanisms should we put in place to be able to hold them accountable for not actually following what is clearly in front of them?
Senator, you're asking the right question. When it comes to accountability, it can't be overstated. When the Biden White House stripped 440 White House hard passes from independent journalists, they were attempting to control the narrative, to make sure that no one who wanted to hold them accountable was silenced. Part of what I think this administration has done so well is bringing in new voices, people from disparate backgrounds of all sorts, to ask the White House press secretary, to ask the senior staff, and to be able to hold them accountable. Part of it is allowing other voices in the media. We've seen what the legacy media did, but that's why I think the growth of independent media is so healthy for our democracy, and we need more of it, not less.
What about you, Mr. Spicer? Do you stand up and do it and tell the truth and run, or do you have a greater obligation to your boss?
Well, luckily, I didn't have that problem. But I would say that you have a moral obligation as an American, as a citizen, as a human being. If the leader of the free world cannot conduct themselves to make the decisions that are critical to this country and to the world, you absolutely have a moral obligation to follow the chain of command. And if they don't act, then you must. The president normally goes under a routine physical every year. In the case of President Biden, it was Dr. O'Connor who affirmatively stated his fitness for office. The doctor is probably the most competent person to attest to the president's fitness for office. The doctor should be held accountable for stating in the affirmative that President Biden was fit for office.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Biden administration may go down in history as the most brazen constitutional fraud in American history. A Potemkin presidency fronted by a failing puppet with staffers behind the scenes pulling the strings. This is not political hyperbole. The American people saw it with their own eyes during the June 2024 debate. Numerous times, Biden stood frozen behind the podium, mouth agape, eyes frozen and unblinking. When he did speak, his words were confused and disjointed. I said that night, this is the most consequential presidential debate in history because it will result in one of the two candidates being removed from the ballot. That was exactly right. And following that debate, the Democrats recognized the collapse. They pulled out their knives and took out President Biden like Caesar on the Ides of March. For all of their strutting about, protesting that they support democracy, not a one of them gave a damn about democracy when they pulled Biden off the ballot and dropped Kamala Harris in without a single Democrat primary voter voting for him. And you know what? Not a single Democrat is here today because not a single one of them gives a damn about the fact that they lied to the American people for 4 years. They knew. Every one of them knew that Joe Biden was mentally not competent to do the job. The White House press secretary, she knew when she stood in front of the American people and lied over and over and over again. And they're not here because they can't defend themselves. It wasn't a surprise. For 4 years, the White House hid President Biden from Republican senators, would not let him meet with us. He served 40 years in this body. We all know him. And they deliberately lied. And by the way, Jake Tapper had a bombshell book exposing the incredible scandal that Biden's mental decline was covered up by Jake Tapper. There's a Yiddish word, chutzpah. And that truly is chutzpah. How dare we lie and cover up what we all knew? Now, I have been asked literally 1,000 times by Texans, who was running the country? And I'm going to give you the most terrifying answer. I don't know. I genuinely don't know. And not a single Democrat here cares. The most telling proof of Biden's decline came with the signature of the president, the symbol of executive authority that was outsourced to a machine. Mr. Wold, you're a lawyer who served in the White House counsel's office. You understand the gravity of presidential action. Does the president's signature carry legal and constitutional weight under Article 2?
Yes.
Is the act of signing an executive order or signing a law or granting a pardon a delegable duty of the president?
So in that opinion in 2005 from OLC, they said essentially that an Autopen could be used by a subordinate, but the president's determination as to sign the document can never be delegated.
Can that authority be transferred to a staffer or a machine without the president's explicit authorization?
Never.
And if you look at the statistics are stunning. In 2021, President Biden issued 78 executive orders. None were signed with an Autopen. That first year of the presidency, Biden, I suppose, was relatively lucid, and 78 executive orders he signed by hand. The second year, however, we see the Autopen emerge. The first Autopen executive order was issued on July 15th, 2022. After that day, 100% of the executive orders issued in 2022 were signed by an Autopen. In 2023, Biden issued 24 executive orders. 16 were Autopenned. In 2024, Biden issued 19. 14 were Autopenned. In 2025, Biden issued 14 executive orders. Every single one was Autopenned. Mr. Wald, let me ask you as a legal matter, if there's a law that's passed both houses of Congress and it goes to the White House, and a staffer autopens signing that law without the president's authorization, is that law legally passed and signed into law?
No.
If an executive order is issued and a staffer autopens it without the president's authorization, is that executive order legally binding?
No.
And if a pardon is issued from the President of the United States and a staffer autopens it without the president's authorization, is that pardon legally binding?
No.
Under the Biden White House, the ceremonial song, Hail to the Chief, was effectively replaced with Hail to the Pen. And it was an outright assault on democracy. And every reporter covering this ought to ask, why doesn't a Democrat care? We heard about the moral responsibilities of a staffer. How about an elected senator who knows damn well that if we get into a war and Iran is preparing to fire a nuclear weapon at the United States, that the commander-in-chief is busy playing with his Jell-O and is not competent to defend ourselves? And every member of the cabinet, the chief of staff, the press secretary, and the members of Congress who lied about this on a daily basis with the press's complicity, they are all responsible for subverting democracy.
So, Mr. Spicer, maybe the mechanics were a little bit different. Maybe the timing was not the same, but doesn't that demonstrate the capacity of the leadership of the Democratic Party, of the Biden family, of the senior staff and the president's administration to be able to convince the president that he no longer was capable of serving and needed to step down?
Senator, the left and their friends in the media like to throw around terms like threats to democracy, constitutional crisis. And if we don't have confidence in the leader of the free world making decisions, that truly is the definition of a constitutional crisis and the threat to democracy. So for all these folks to stand up here and use those phrases over and over again and then not have the desire to show up, to understand what's happening, to stand up at the time, as we discussed earlier, whether it was a staffer or a cabinet member, to literally avoid going to the Oval Office, and in the case of the media, to avoid the questions that were so clearly obvious to the rest of America, shows that they were more concerned with power and preserving that power and an agenda than they were at really caring about the Constitution and democracy.
Mr. Spicer, you've criticized the corporate media and legacy media folks for sort of lying down here or being complicit because of their, whether it's Trump derangement syndrome or whatever the reason was. Who specifically do you think gets a gold star for lying most profusely and just sort of continuing to cover this up over the years?
Sir, that would be like a photo finish. There'd be a lot that would probably right there at first place. They're all culpable. I mean, I read some of the headlines to the committee earlier, the Washington Post, CNN, NBC, where they, without evidence, to use their phrase, went after President Trump's physical and mental acuity, and yet failed to ask similar questions of the White House press office publicly. They failed to cover the stories. I don't think that there's a winner. I think they're all losers.
All right, thanks for watching. I really appreciate you guys being here. I hope you found that insightful, some of the exchanges going back and forth. But anyway, I appreciate it. As I said, tomorrow, a great panel discussion coming your way. And then on Friday, Robert O'Brien, President Trump's former national security advisor, will be at. I've got some great new newsletters, topics out at SeanSpicer.com. Sign up. Always feel free to join us for the premiere at 6 o'clock on YouTube. We love to have you, or watch on the First Television Network, Channel 347 on DirecTV, and all sorts of other streaming platforms. Thanks for being here. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.